All right. Welcome everyone to an exciting panel that we are convening here on one of the most exciting announcements of the past several months in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, which was the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency announcing a couple of months ago that they consider it acceptable for banks to act as custodians of cryptocurrency and possibly other crypto assets, which we're going to discuss right off the bat here for their clients. My name is David Morris. I'm a reporter with Fortune. I've been covering cryptocurrency and blockchain in various capacities for almost 7 years now, which is shocking. And actually maybe even 8. And I'm here with 5 of the most accomplished and high-ranking people working in the realm of digital assets on both sides of the aisle. And we're going to go around and everybody will give a little self-introduction before we get into a discussion of the implications of this OCC announcement for cryptocurrency, for crypto assets, for various versions of that technology and the market there. So let's start with Mason Borda of Tokensoft. And just give a quick self-introduction, and then we'll go around and then we'll get to questions and discussion.
Okay, my name is Mason. I'm the CEO of Tokensoft. Been in the crypto space since 2013. And at Tokensoft, we help companies issue digital assets and digital assets securities. So we really support 3 asset classes, blockchain tokens. So we help companies that want to fundraise internationally and launch a blockchain such as Tezos or Hashgraph. We also power SEC registered security tokens. So Arca and INX are a couple of our partners. And more recently, we launched Wrapped in a partnership with Anchorage. And the first asset being issued under there, or launched under there is Wrapped Zcash. So those are a couple of things that we do at Tokensoft.
Great. We're going to kind of go clockwise here. So let's go to Georgia Quinn next, who is General Counsel at Anchorage.
Hi, thanks, David. So yeah, I'm Georgia Quinn, General Counsel. Anchorage is a premier digital asset platform for institutions. We offer custody services, so this conversation is obviously very important to us. We also offer brokerage and lending services and staking as well. Prior to coming to Anchorage, I was the General Counsel at CoinList, which is also very prominent in the crypto industry. And I'm a securities attorney by training, been practicing for over 15 years.
And Alan Silbert is with us, Executive Managing Director at INX.
Yeah, I'm Alan, like you said, Executive Managing Director at INX. We are building a regulated cryptocurrency and security token trading platform in the US. And we most recently pushed through the SEC the first registered security token IPO in history, which is ongoing right now. So I've been in crypto since 2013. Before that, 20 years in commercial banking for Merrill Lynch Capital, GE Capital, and Capital One Bank. And yeah, now I'm all down the rabbit hole on regulated cryptocurrency and security tokens.
Excellent. Next up is Jerald David, President of Arca.
Thank you, David. My name is Jerry David, and I'm the president of Arca Labs. Arca, as you may know, operates 2 different business lines. The first is Arca Funds, and Arca Funds manages private funds that invest in digital assets. The mandate for that fund is liquid event-driven strategies that are focused on investing in the top 50 or so different tokens. On the other side of the business is Arca Labs, and our mandate is to develop new investment vehicles using blockchain technology. Earlier this year, we announced that we were the first fund that had received any approval from the SEC to issue a 40 Act fund that has a digital security. So with that, we launched Arcoin, and Arcoin is the first of a suite of BTFs, or blockchain transferred funds, that Arca Labs will be pushing forward.
And last but certainly not least, we are blessed today with somebody on the other side of the aisle, so to speak, Mark O'Horo, who is counsel with the Bank Advisory Group of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Mark, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you very much. So before I give any more in the way of introduction, I should briefly caveat that the views that I express today are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. So I've been working for the OCC for approximately 6 years now on a variety of matters, most recently issues relating to cryptocurrency, and in particular, Interpretive Letter 1170, addressing the authority of national banks to engage in custody services for digital assets, and then Interpretive Letter 1172, addressing the authority of national banks to hold deposits that serve as reserves for stablecoin issuers.
Great. So I actually wanted to start with a question for you, Mark, to take the maximum advantage of having somebody in a position like yours. I'm curious, can you provide any insight, broad or narrow, into OCC's decision-making process on this? How long has it been on the table as a topic of consideration? Was there anything in particular that encouraged progress in this direction, or even taking any stand whatsoever on the issue? Just anything that you think would be interesting for people to hear about how this process goes.
Sure. So I think that in some ways, the letter was a long time in the making. The OCC has long been engaged in issues relating to fintech and financial innovation generally. And to that end, a few years ago, we launched our Office of Innovation that serves as a clearinghouse for questions relating to new financial products and services. And they've been very actively engaged with industry participants. But more to the point of the most recent letters, I think that it just became more and more clear over time that there was significant demand from institutions and individuals to have a safe, trusted third party that would provide custody services for cryptocurrencies. And in addition, some states have already recognized this as well. Wyoming, obviously, and in addition, Rhode Island and Hawaii had introduced legislation addressing the authority of banks to engage in these types of custody services. So I think altogether, it just became clearer and clearer over time that a public statement by the OCC affirming national banks' authority to engage in these activities would be useful and provide a good deal of clarity to industry and the public.
Great. So it's demand is a really interesting way to think about that. So to sort of build off that, as a writer, I pay an inordinate probably amount of attention to the specific words that are used. And in the statement, and Mark, you just said, again, this is in reference to cryptocurrency. Now, for people who are inside the industry, cryptocurrency proper is sort of a particular kind of digital asset. So this is a question for Georgia, and then others can certainly chime in. I mean, what is the relevance of this statement about cryptocurrency when we're thinking about digital assets, digital securities, things that for those of us who are maybe insiders or more knowledgeable, we recognize there's a distinction between a currency and a security?
Sure. I mean, this actually is probably a question for Mark, but the distinction is cryptocurrency generally, references things like Bitcoin, ETH that are, ubiquitous, transfers of value, could be used for goods and services, distinct from what you would think of as a security. However, my interpretation of the guidance is that cryptocurrency is used more broadly to really describe digital assets. Now, banks, federal banks, national banks, already have the authority to custody securities. So that would not be anything new. Mm-hmm. And frankly, this letter simply confirms that they have the authority to custody cryptocurrency. So, the way I read the letter is as though the bank is being affirmed of its ability to custody digital assets, whether they are securities, whether they are cryptocurrencies, whether they are other kind, some other category that we want to come up with. A bank, a national bank is a, place that can properly custody those types of assets.
Anybody else want to chime in on that distinction or difference? Okay, well, maybe we can also take a little bit of a step back to the big picture, and maybe Jerald, you can take a crack at this. Mark referenced demand from customers, but more broadly, what is the advantage for a bank in the traditional sense of whether we're talking about cryptocurrency or digital securities? What's the advantage for a bank of offering those services, and advantages for the market more generally, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's right. And David, I think that talks a little bit to what our mindset was when we began developing and thinking about what we were going to do with our fund. We had some decision trees that we came across early on, and we had options of whether or not we wanted to create something that would be clearly defined and pursue the path of a regulated security. And we thought that was the appropriate path for us for a variety of reasons, and most specifically, David, because of the large-scale financial institutions. We recognize that right now there's going to be a lot of work on the side of the banks and large-scale financial players in terms of analyzing and understanding this marketplace, and many have been at it for many, many years. So just because banks aren't trading digital assets or digital securities right now doesn't mean that they don't have task forces or large-scale teams that are analyzing and understanding what the opportunity set is. But more importantly, I think to your question is how they manage their risk and how they mitigate it. And for us, taking the path of becoming a regulated security, knowing that we wanted to create a tool, an instrument that could be utilized by large-scale financial institutions made a lot of sense. The safeguards and standards that are bestowed upon a 40 Act fund are very, very familiar to large-scale banking institutions. So things like bankruptcy remote, other things like full-on transparency and reporting are kind of the standard right now that's been set in order to give a level of confidence for financial institutions to execute on securities. So for us, overlaying some of those benefits and actually, offering a digital asset that contained them inherently was super important for us, and one of the main reasons why we chose that path. The other thing I think that was super important is that, this risk mitigation is going to be critical. Banks are not going to be comfortable with, the risk of having a ledger falling into the Hudson River, for example, right, and losing all your digital assets. So some of the protections, specifically with the 1404 standard that Tokensoft has designed on our behalf, and on behalf of the securities industry, are super helpful as well. Things about public and private key pairing. If someone does lose one of their keys, is something that gives a sense of security, I think, to financial players.
Okay. Mason, anybody else want to chime in on the broader advantages or opportunities of this new offering from banks? Well, Mason, maybe we can go in a slightly contrarian direction here. You've been in the industry for a long time as well, and there is this divide between kind of crypto purists, philosophically driven people. Well, maybe it's a divide or not, but some would say that the main impetus of crypto at the beginning was to provide an alternative to the banking system. And the OCC notice even specifically says that by allowing banks to custody crypto, and I'm quoting here, banks can, quote, continue to fulfill the financial intermediation function that they have historically played. So, I mean, to what extent is this some kind of departure from the legacy of like Satoshi, or is that the wrong way of thinking about it? Is it a stepping stone?
Yeah, so I think in the crypto space, everything always starts out as sort of a novel technology. So even in the blockchain space, there's maybe 10 new technologies that are developed a year. Those all form into different products. And I think, initially people sort of make these, they play around with a small group of people. And then over time, these projects turn into companies. As they turn into companies and serve other customers, some of these are regulated activities. And so they need different types of licensing. I think the good thing is, as these companies are scaling, as they're sort of running into these hurdles, it also opens them up to a broader audience. I think we see this with Coinbase. Not necessarily regulated to start, bumped into regulations, packaged up nicely into them, and now they're serving a much larger audience. So I think it's a good thing for the space. I think it shows that it's maturing, and it'll eventually open it up to a much broader audience over time.
Yeah, I think everything in the regulated space moves very slow and very iteratively. So, little baby tiny steps is what we have to kind of live with. We kind of saw through our process. We wanted to institute a lot of the kind of decentralized things like that you alluded to with Satoshi and stuff, but it's just like we're not there yet. The regulators tend to push you towards centralization, towards you can't have like a bearer asset that can just get lost in cyberspace. They're just not there yet. We need certain features like what Mason's team created, like some revoke features and things like that, and blacklisting. So yeah, I think we'll get there, but it's a slow iterative process. But I mean, look, when I first got into crypto in 2013, I thought the government would entirely shut it down within like 5 years. So we've gotten a long way in that respect. And I think it's kind of here to stay.
So to that question, Georgia, please go ahead.
Sorry. I think that's the double-edged sword of like the crypto purism, is that it's supposed to be this broadly decentralized thing in the hands of the masses. But in the regulatory state, anytime you put things in the hands of retail people, you're automatically going to dry the ire of the regulators, and it's going, it's going to necessitate some sort of oversight.
Mm-hmm. And it's also worth noting that when you put things in the hand of retail, which we saw yet another one today with Harvest, there's going to be things that go wrong, right? Not that it doesn't go wrong when there's regulation as well. But Alan, to follow up on the direction you were going, you work on a platform for handling these assets, and I believe you do some issuance as well. I'm not sure, but based on working with banks and just industry knowledge. How well positioned are banks, traditional banks, to provide this kind of custody? Do they have the customers? Is the market there from what you've seen? Like what is their positioning to take advantage of these new technologies?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of the demand there, I mean, I think you can see like if you look, I think there's a Charles Schwab study that came out that showed that Robinhood, in the top 10, I think millennials have more GBTC to beat the Bitcoin tracking stock than they do like Netflix. And, you have a young generation that's, very well acclimated to crypto and tokens and things like that. The banks are equipped. I mean, look, the legacy space, when you move money around the world, it's just zeros and ones, right? Everything's a ledger entry. So, it's, usually with banks, and from my legacy experience, it's just the banks have an enormous burden from an AML KYC perspective. They're very, very cautious on that front and have to make sure they dot all the I's and cross all the T's. So, and that's probably where the most hesitation is, along with having to kind of shrug off, some of the crypto, the bad image that came with crypto to begin with, which made everything like an uphill battle. So yeah, they're equipped. It's not rocket science per se, but they have to meet their regulatory obligations, and banks tend to move slow like regulations do.
Mm.
I think that's sort of the interesting. I think that's sort of the interesting thing about serving sort of larger and larger audiences is as we sort of build into larger companies, the KYC/AML obligations, but also the internal compliance requirements are a lot more complicated and complex. So when people are sort of building these blockchain solutions as projects, it's sort of an open field. You can build it however you want. And I think we're definitely going to see some growing pains as this technology moves into larger and larger banks and larger institutions. I think PayPal is a great example of that. They rolled out cryptocurrency support. They announced it. And as people started digging into it, it looked like, yeah, they can support it. You can, get your money in, you can get your crypto in, but you can't necessarily get it out. And I think that's a very good example of a situation where it's going to take a little bit more time to mature into the internal policies and procedures before cryptocurrency can be completely usable the same way it is, in our own wallets today in a company like PayPal.
Jerald, it sounded like you had something to add too.
Yeah, I was going to talk about, kind of the way that I look at the space right now. You've got the incumbents, and the incumbents are not, the well-known names within the traditional world, right? I mean, you've got folks like Anchorage, you've got folks like Bitka, you've got folks that are out there that have created, solutions that are ample and totally credible and secure and safe and compliant for the marketplace as it is right now. What I would say is that it's going to be very interesting to watch this space over the course of time. As you start seeing incumbents that are actually going to be entering the space and offering these kind of services, how are they going to compete, right? They're not nimble, obviously, by nature. Banking infrastructure may have, kind of be quite antiquated as well as it is well known within other circles. And you've got these upstarts that have created solutions, kind of from scratch without any legacy technology barriers or constraints. It will be very, very interesting to watch see how this plays out, to understand how kind of the underdogs, kind of go against the incumbents, and to understand who's gravitating to who within the space.
Yeah, Jerald, you literally guessed my next question. So I'll just kind of put a point on it and invite everybody else to chime in, which is, not only do you have places that are doing this already
Right.
and are kind of native, but there's at least speculation, and I think some early signs that those players are actually going to be moving towards the incumbent players, or at least some of their capabilities, whether that means people getting banking licenses, offering, there's been a lot of speculation that a crypto platform like Coinbase could do really well by offering traditional equities trading. So just to open it up to other folks, like what Jerald's saying it's going to be interesting to see it play out. What are you predicting?
Well, I can just say from our experience, and I'm sure it's no surprise, but even prior to the OCC letter, we were receiving a lot of inbound inquiry from the traditional banking institutions, with respect to the services that we provide and how, to potentially integrate or sub-custody or, provide those services. So, they're definitely, while they move slowly, they're still, definitely interested. And I think the OCC letter just kind of, turned up the heat a little bit.
Yeah, I think Georgia, to that point, I think there's probably a bunch of things that are all converging at the same time, right? I mean, as Mason mentioned a second ago, MicroStrategy, Square, PayPal. I think those names did a lot, not just for our industry alone, but I think for the traditional space. I think that served as a warning to a lot of different corporate treasurers and a lot of different C-suite executives that their competitors are moving relatively fast. And that people need to have a strategy in place. And I think that what George is saying and what some of the other kind of folks that are providing services in this space right now would probably say, custodian and otherwise, are that their phones lit up over the past week or so with a ton of people that were looking to understand what they need to do so that they can be competitive. And if those kind of companies are not doing it, then we probably have to start questioning kind of what the long-term plans are and what the long-term concerns are for these different entities.
And I guess that brings up that puts a slightly finer point on one aspect of the question, which is if you're MicroStrategy and you're trying to whatever it was, $500 million worth of Bitcoin, obviously there are institutional services within crypto, but are the people who come after MicroStrategy, are they going to be looking to or are they going to care whether they're custodying these treasury reserves or other large holdings with a crypto first company or a bank that's offering crypto services? Is that going to be a decision that people are weighing, and what might those considerations be?
I sort of see this from a cybersecurity lens. So I think the incumbents, the crypto first incumbents have really high quality and very detailed compliance procedures when it comes to key generation and how they go about that. And those are procedures that have been baked in over the last 10 years and best practices that have been sort of baked in. And the one thing we see, at least in the crypto space, is when there's new incumbents, a lot of the lessons are lost that the companies have learned over time. As larger companies like MicroStrategy sort of enter the space, I think that's a very important question. I would ask, does it make more sense to look at a crypto first solution that understands the technology from the ground up, or does a very large a large bank, perhaps, if one becomes available, is that the right place to purchase and hold your Bitcoin? So I think that's probably going to be the biggest one of the biggest growing pains, at least on the cybersecurity side.
I think there's also one other place to keep our eyes on, Mason. I think that's in kind of the advent of these new crypto banks, if you will. So folks like Avanti and Kraken, who are kind of this hybrid of two different sides of what we're talking about right here. They're kind of they're banks, but they're certainly kind of more, they feel more to me like an incumbent than they do to a traditional bank.
Yeah, they definitely carry skills from the traditional crypto space into modern, regulated structures.
Yeah. So I think we have a little bit over 5 minutes left. Again, because we have Mark here, I wanted to kind of open it up for maybe even questions you guys want to ask him, but more generally, are there unanswered questions in this OCC clarification, or are there things that are going to require maybe legislative action? Are there still, regulatory developments that lay ahead of us that will be important to clarify?
Well, I actually had this question for Mark that when Alan was mentioning, that banks have been just moving ones and zeros around for years. Our money has been digital for quite some time now. And I am so curious, Mark, is this kind of the way that you guys have been thinking about it in your office? Do you have this, is that the way you kind of depict finance and currency, or is it a more traditional viewpoint?
So I think there are a couple different ways of looking at it. I think from my perspective as a legal perspective, going back to your comments towards the beginning of this conversation, I think we view it as sort of an extension of what banks have been doing for years. They've long been custodians, and they've been custodians for digital assets before. This latest set of letters really just is a logical extension of what has happened before. I think beyond that, from a operational perspective, I think we recognize that there are some elements of banks' custody services that they've provided before that will carry over, but we do want banks and ourselves as regulators to be mindful of any new or unique risks that come up with these assets. Much in the same way that if a bank wanted to start custodying a priceless painting but didn't have experience in that before, we would want to make sure that they've developed the requisite expertise, even though it's clearly permissible from the perspective of it's simply providing custody services. So I think that that's largely how we view it.
So Mark, I have a question, and it's great that you're here. Thanks for joining. So, in the security token broker dealer space, the elephant in the room is the 15C3-3 and the waiting on this guidance from the SEC about how banks can, adhere to the law in custodying digital assets. The US is just a web of regulators, and they kind of interact and kind of don't. What is the relationship between the OCC and the SEC on matters like this? Does your guidance get looked at by the SEC markets group? Do you have any influence over there? Are there discussions on these fronts? I'm just kind of curious. Everybody just kind of is waiting around for the SEC to come with guidance on this, and hopefully a transfer agent like Mason is agreeable to be a good place to custody for 15C3-3. But do you have any comments on this in general?
I think at a very high level, I think I can just say that it oftentimes depends on the particular issue that we're looking at. I think in the stablecoin reserves letter, there was a statement in the footnote noting that on the same day that we issued that letter, SEC staff had issued a statement encouraging market participants to come to them with questions about how to structure stablecoins so that they would be compliant with SEC rules and regulations. And so I think that certainly is an example of one area where there has been some cooperation and some discussion, but I think more broadly speaking, it kind of is an issue by issue discussion.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, I think the SEC kind of, they always say they're inviting questions, and then, I mean, I know the questions are coming probably from the entire industry, and it's just more of like, you know, they need to kind of move, I guess. I'm just personally venting, but yeah, it's kind of the way it's been for a couple of years.
Well, you saw that right after the announcement that, you know, clarifying that banks could custody the deposits for stable coins, like 3 hours later, the SEC came out with this like scrambled announcement that like, but don't forget, those stable coins still might be securities. So don't forget to talk to us first. And it just seemed like such an afterthought. I really felt like they were on their back foot.
And I think that those are two of the big things that, at least from our standpoint, that we've got our eye on, right? You know, one obviously is the good control issue for custody at broker-dealer level, and then the second one really, you know, kind of is precisely that, Georgia.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time. We might even be a little bit over time. So thank you to Mason, Mark, Jerald, Alan, and Georgia for joining us. And thanks to everybody who, this is pre-recorded, so you'll see us a few days from now. But thanks for being here, and appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks so much.
Goodbye.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again, guys. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.